Okay, so thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Rafael Miguel, and I'm here today to present you the results of a clinical research project in which I have participated. Before we start, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on my professional profile. Actually, I have been working in the computer security industry for 11 years. So I guess the first question is, why did you get involved in something related to data analytics? And the answer is very simple, just because I like it. So what I did, I read a few books about SAS, Hadoop, and so on. And then I decided that I wanted to participate in something that will be sexy, compelling, a market sector where we could realize the benefits of data analytics. So I decided to choose healthcare. So what I did was was to go and meet one senior doctor in one hospital in Madrid, and I spent like 2 hours explaining to him, I want to get involved in something related to data analytics with healthcare, so I'm going to use your data and I'm going to come up with useful conclusions, and we are going to run data analytics techniques and so on. And after those 2 hours, this doctor said to me something like this: I am not sure what you are trying to achieve. So I was a little bit disappointed on that, but at the same time he said, okay, let's do it. And we went for it. So we have been running this project for 6 months now, and we presented the results about a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago actually. And what I'd like to say is that the answer that I got from this senior doctor after he saw the results was quite different. He said we should create a company to sell this as a product. We are not creating any company, but I think this means it is a good signal that what we did was a little bit useful. So before we get into the results of the project, I want to explain to you how traditional clinical research works. The first thing is that running a single study usually takes 2 to 3 months, which is a long time. Everything starts with an hypothesis and a custom data set. And the reason why I'm displaying this guy is digging into data is it is really resembling how the process to gather that data works. So it takes a lot of time, it is complex, but more importantly, this is something that can be used once for that specific study. When we run the statistical analysis, what we get is either new knowledge that it is then shared with the community, or the hypothesis is not confirmed, and then everything that has been done was not a waste of time, but was not the expected outcome. So if I have to summarize how this process works, I will say that it is linear, it has one maximum potential outcome, it has a high probability of failure, and it is a long play because it takes long. So what I proposed to this senior doctor was to take a different approach. Why don't we place data right in the middle, and then we run a number of processes around it. So one of them will be a statistical analysis, the other one will be predictive modeling, and the last one will be visual analytics. So what we get with that is, with the statistical analysis, we get access to non-intuitive relationships. With predictive modeling, we will get to business process improvement. And with visual analytics, we will get two things. One is not expected new insights, I mean, things that were not supposed to be like that, but also raising questions that are facts-based, and that's something that we repeat a lot in the industry, but in this case, it was absolutely demonstrated. At the end of the day, what we will have is new knowledge, but more importantly, we will have results that can be input back to data, and in this sense, we will be able to use that additional data for subsequent analysis. So I want you to see the big difference between the first traditional approach and the one that we were proposing. This one is continuous, and this one has multiple potential outcomes. So we set a number of goals for this project. The first one was proving that this approach was better than the traditional way of doing things. The second one was if we were able to produce net new knowledge, things that were not known in the medical community before. The third goal was to check whether we could improve prediction because we were using the full data set and we were not using a sample. So hopefully the prediction accuracy will be higher. And finally, we wanted to provide an exploratory analysis tool that doctors could use by themselves to mine data, so without the assistance of a data scientist. To achieve these goals, we focus on 3 key areas. The first one is statistical analysis. It couldn't be other way. Predictive modeling, and in this phase, we wanted to identify if we could predict key target clinical variables like length of stay, admission rate, mortality, and so on. And finally, data visualization, because if we want to deliver this exploratory analysis in such a way that a non-technical person can run this analysis, it has to be in a visual and very intuitive way. Regarding the data set, there is a big difference between the traditional approach and the one that we used. What we used was the full database. We were using clinical records from elderly patients that were admitted into a hospital, into the acute unit, from 2006 to today. So we were not sampling. And this information was including details like demographics, diagnosis, treatment, functional and mental status, and many other variables that are part of the data gathering process when one patient is admitted. Just for your information, elderly patients are those patients being 75 years old or older, so it is old people. And we were using a number of tools that will be very well known to you. We used SAS Enterprise Miner, we used RStudio, we also used Weka, and we used IBM SPSS. And in the middle of everything, it was obviously Hadoop, because we needed a platform to load those thousands and potentially millions of records to be processed. So, as I said, the project was split in 3 phases. Phase 1 was a statistical analysis. And in this case, let me tell you something before we start. The hospital in which I was working had a program to provide specialized assistance to nursing homes. Nursing homes are the places where these patients, being old, live. So when under this program, these patients receive a specialized assistance from someone from the hospital, from a senior doctor delivering those services. So the outcome, the supposed outcome, is that they are giving better care to these patients. These patients will need fewer support from the hospital, so they will go less times to the hospital, and that means that they will be in better shape, but also that we will lower the cost to deliver healthcare. And that is a very important outcome. So the goal that we had was to validate that these programs could provide this expected return on investment. This is something that we repeat a lot in the industry, something not based on intuition or creativity, but something based on facts. And that is exactly what we wanted to achieve. So we used a number of target parameters to compare those patients subject to this program and the other patients. So the methodology that we use is also very well known. It is Chi-square test with obviously a number of pre-requirements, checking normality, checking equality of variances, and so on, something with which data scientists are very familiar. And the results that we got were interesting. We discovered that those patients subject to the program exhibit a better functional and mental status, as well as a higher, better Barthel index. The Barthel index measures disability of the patient, so the ability to do things by themselves. And they also had a lower number of complications when they were admitted into a hospital. And this is a fantastic outcome because it is telling us that this program that they have implemented, which obviously has a cost, it is providing the expected outcome. It is telling us that it is performing very well in 13 parameters, and it is performing as well as not having the program in place for the other parameters. So in any case, it is a good thing to have. So with this, what we are basically achieving is new knowledge that was not known before. Now we know why we are investing in this program, and we can measure what is the improvement that we get out of it. Okay, so in second phase, we focus on predictive modeling, and we wanted to predict a number of key clinical variables. The first one was the nursing homes performance. So what doctors wants to know is what are the features or the services or the capabilities that a nursing home must have in order to provide better care. Because when it provides better care, then patients will not need to go to the hospital, which is what we said before. So we want to know which nursing homes are leading to lower admission rates. They were also interested in length of stay. When a patient is admitted into a hospital, they want to know how long he or she will stay. And doing that is crucial for forecasting and planning processes. So we know which doctors will be busy taking care of one patient, and then we can do an assignment that is more efficient. But also, if we see that a patient is going to require a long stay, then we can apply a different treatment to make that stay shorter. And the other variable that was important, and I think this is not bringing any discussion into the table, was mortality, right? So we want to understand what is driving mortality among patients. What we used is something that you will be very familiar with. We use diagrams, we use transformation of variables, we use visual inspection, model fit indicators, and quantile-based comparison. So a pretty standard stuff that you are very aware of. But the most important thing, and what it is different, is that we used an agnostic approach. We were like driving blindfolded, because we were not asking any particular questions. We were not formulating an hypothesis. And we were not focusing on any particular input variables because we didn't have anything in mind. We were doing it from scratch. The other thing is that we ran multiple iterations and configurations for this analysis to come up with as many results as possible. We didn't want to have a single outcome, remember, we want to have as many as possible. And we didn't have any previous knowledge. I mean, I didn't have any previous knowledge when I started doing this. So what were the outcomes? It was funny because we started with predicting the mortality rate. And the first predictive model that we came up with in the first iteration demonstrated that we could predict mortality with 100% of accuracy by using another variable that was place of exitus. Exitus is the medical term to mean that the patient has passed away. So it was funny because it had absolutely no value, right? Yeah, someone that has died has a place of exitus, and it is a no-brainer predicting mortality this way. In iteration 2, we get to a different result that looked to be promising. Mortality was heavily associated with morphine, which is a drug commonly known because it is administered to patients that are about to die. So that was a little bit less funny, but for the doctors, it had absolutely no value, right? They know that when they are administering morphine, the patient is going to die anyway. But in iteration 3, we discovered something interesting. We discovered that by combining 3 variables, the one you see in the screen, we were able to come up with an accurate rate of mortality of patients. The most important parameter is the first one, because digoxin is one drug, that initially is not connected to mortality, but we discovered that it was actually connected to mortality. So what we discovered was an adverse reaction to certain drugs in the elderly population. Once we came up with this result, we checked the available studies, and we saw that these had been discovered before. There were studies explaining that digoxin could be connected to mortality. But what it is important is that those studies were formulating the hypothesis that this could be like that, while in our case, we discovered it randomly because we were not looking for that particular outcome. So I will say that our contribution here was in finding non-intuitive relationships. The other thing is that we were able to predict the length of stay. The model that we created was accounting for more than 95% of the target variables variance. So it was, let's say, reliable, sustainable. And we were able to predict length of stay through a number of different variables, like previous number of admissions, gender, diagnosis, falls, the total number of drugs, the infections got at the hospital, and other variables. And we saw that the model was performing quite well. So we thought that this could be a good business practice improvement, because this way they can improve the forecasting and the planning of the available resources in the hospital. And finally, we were also able to discover to predict the admission rate from nursing homes. Remember, we wanted to discover what were the factors influencing performance in these institutions. And what we discovered was, quite nice, because we discovered that the number of beds was heavily linked to the number of admissions. So when the nursing home has more beds, it has a lower admission rate. And in this case, the model was explaining more than 86% of the target's variance. So it was also a reliable model. The use that this information has for a hospital is, the value that it has is quite high, because in this way they can predict how many admissions they are going to have in advance in the future from the nursing homes they are serving. But more importantly, they can, when it comes to selecting a new nursing home to be served, to be part of the coverage, now they can make a smart selection. They can choose the ones that are going to bring to a lower admission rates. Finally, the third phase was data visualization. We wanted to provide doctors with a tool that they could use to find new insights on the go. So the background in this case was delivering this tool so that they could mine data, not only to insights, but also to go beyond the results that we had discovered before. Okay, so in a visual way, you can get to the same results, and you can extend the research and find new things happening in the data. And obviously, we wanted to use Hadoop because that made it possible to extend the capacity of the system to process nearly millions of records. So the architecture that we used was, again, quite well known: Cloudera, Hadoop user experience to design the dashboards, and Apache Sol-R. And the reason why we had to use this one was because we wanted to index data in such a way that the queries that were launched from the dashboard would have an immediate response. So it was processing in real time. So how does it look like? Well, this is how it looked like. By the way, it looks much better in this screen. You can see just a list of indicators, a list of graphs, diagrams. But yeah, it might be beautiful or not, I don't know. But we wanted also to make it useful. So what we did was letting doctors ask questions and see what the response was by using this environment. So the first questions we got was, what are the defining characteristics of a patient with a heart failure? It was quite simple. We selected the value 428 from the list of diagnoses, and we saw all the indicators updated, and we focused on those that were more interesting. For example, functional and mental status, year of admission, gender, age, and so on. And we discovered that the most frequent profile for this particular disease was someone being between 85 and 95 years old, being a woman, and with a Barthel index, level of disability, higher than average. So that was bringing new knowledge to the table. The second question that they asked was, which trends are observed in admissions related to pneumonia? We did the same. We selected this diagnosis from the list, and in this case, we focused on the evolution of yearly admissions related to this particular disease. And what we discovered was that the number of admissions had grown by 4 times in the last 7 years. You might have something in mind. For example, okay, what if the yearly number of admissions is also growing? Perhaps it is not growing by itself in pneumonia, in this particular disease. But we will see a little bit later that this is not the case, and pneumonia is something to really consider. The third question that we solved was, are there variations in readmission rates from patients from Hospital A and Hospital B? We selected both hospitals, and we saw what was the readmission rate. And we saw that in Hospital A, the rate was 12, and in Hospital B, it was only 8%. Remember, we are using the full database. We are using the full data set. So we don't really need inference techniques to see if this is something that can be extrapolated, because we are talking about 2 hospitals, and we have all data. So also, this is new knowledge that we bring into the table. And this is the last question that was answered. And it also came with additional insights, as we will see right now. So they were interested in knowing how the workload among doctors was distributed in the acute unit in 2014. So we selected the year 2014, and we saw all the indicators and graphs updated. The one in the middle was telling us that the workload was not evenly distributed. There are doctors with many patients assigned, and doctors with less patients assigned. And this was not expected, because the idea was that all the doctors have an even, an equally distribution of workload. We also discovered that most patients were admitted by noon, as you can see in the screen. And that is telling you that you have to reorganize the capacity to make sure that in this time frame, there will be enough resources to process those admissions. And the last one was even more interesting, because we saw that most diseases were related to infections of a urinary tract and also respiratory problems. If you remember, we saw pneumonia growing by four times in the last 7 years. So this is confirming that this disease is specifically growing into inside a population that is patients having been more than 75 years old. And this is something that could also be linked to the fact that the workload is not evenly distributed, because if one new patient is admitted and it has to do with one of these diseases, one doctor that is specialized in that particular disease will be appointed that patient. If this happens very often, you will end up with doctors that are specialists in these diseases with much more workload than the others. And this could be an explanation of the previous insight that we saw. All of this was done obviously in a visual way without running any statistical analysis or using any of the previous tools. So now it is time to look into the future. My impression is that this is what we did, which is very small, you probably cannot read it, But these are the needs that were identified after we presented the results. This is something that was compelling for doctors, managers, and stakeholders, because all of them had a number of scenarios for implementation that could be created based on the approach that we took. In this specific project, we focus mainly on research, management, a little bit of pharma, but why not applying it also in finance, in human resources, and in other areas? So finally, I would like to give you some takeaways from my experience participating in this project. The first one is that big data analytics can be more efficient than traditional research. What we have seen today is that we have run just a single process and we have got to multiple outcomes instead of formulating an hypothesis and either confirming or rejecting it. So we can get more when we take this big data-based approach. The second one is that exploratory analysis is not a nice to have, it is a must, because when we have it, then we are able to discover more insights in a more easy way, and something that is not requiring the participation of a data scientist, so the doctor can do it by himself. The other one is that predictive modeling, we will be talking a lot about predictive modeling today and tomorrow, but we have to keep in mind that predictive modeling in healthcare is something that has to lead to business process improvement. If we are able to predict length of stay or mortality or anything else, but we don't apply to those business processes to make them better, then we have knowledge that is not applied. So it is very important that anything that comes out of those predictive modeling exercises is something that is applied as part of the management of those healthcare institutions. Okay, so the last one is that extracting insights, it is something that we shouldn't be doing in a one shot, just as part of a single study, as part of a research activity, but it is something that we should be doing in a continuous way, because this way we will be able to obtain an exponential growth of the knowledge that the medical community has available. So this is what we have to focus on. We have to focus on creating those continuous processes to get the most out of this big data approach. And that is pretty much everything that I wanted to share with you today. So thank you very much. And if you send us some feedback, it will be great. Thank you very much.
So Rafael, I think you've proven the case. With 4 takeaways, what would prevent you from keep on this roadmap with our product? Is it because you are using a set of diverse tools? Is it because it's very data scientist centric? How can you scale this and apply it further?
Mm-hmm. I guess this has to do with looking into the future. So nothing is really stopping us to move on. What I said at the beginning is this is something that I did because I like it, just because I wanted to get involved in something like this. So we have dozens of companies here that I guess will be interested in talking to these institutions and making a value proposition that is aligned with these expectations. Obviously, this is just a one-shot exercise with a limited outcome, but all the technologies, all the tools and the methodologies that we used can be applied by any of the top-performing companies that are attending Big Data Spain. So that is definitely a roadmap to follow, and I don't see any limitation, actually.
Okay. Fine. So thank you very much, Rafael.
Thank you.